The first thing I found was the lipstick on my toothbrush. It was crude, cheap red, smeared into the bristles in a deliberate petulant arc, a mark that seemed less accidental and more like a signature. The cap of the toothpaste still carried a hint of perfume, white floral, the kind that clings to airport scarves and strangers' collars. The bathroom light turned the smear into something obscene and bright. For a second my lungs forgot how to move. The apartment condensed into that tiny tile square and the hum of the refrigerator became a verdict. Denial is an old, practiced muscle. I flexed it. There are 100 reasonable explanations for a smear of lipstick. A friend who stayed over. A careless borrowing. An absent-minded test of a new color. I let the plausible rehearsals run through my head like cheap film until logic felt like armor. I rinsed the brush, set it back upright, then noticed the faint furrow of a new worry. Why would a guest use our toothbrush and not theirs? Why would Claire, my Claire, leave the cap off the same way? The why felt smaller and more dangerous than the smear. She came home later, hair loose, heels tapping a cadence that used to be the metronome of my evenings, at least when we were both inside the same rhythm. She smelled like wine, perfume, and something else, the warmth of another woman's hands in her hair. She laughed at a joke heard on the street, the sort of laugh that flares bright to hide whatever is raw below. I wanted to ask, I wanted to rip the world open and find out what lived in that particular shade of red. Instead I kissed her because 10 years of instincts make us polite to our own destruction. Busy day, she said, shrugging out of a coat that had an unfamiliar lipstick stain on the collar. She leaned against the doorframe and watched me with the casual, indulgent look a person gives when they're sure you'll forgive them before you know what they've done. I watched instead. I watched the tilt of her wrist when she poured wine, the way her smile crinkled on the left. I watched until the small things stitched together into suspicion. Late meetings that were never quite explained, a password changed on our shared streaming account, receipts that smelled like perfume but had names I didn't know. When suspicion lives long enough in a house, it breeds evidence like mold in damp corners. We had a life that looked whole from the outside. There were framed photos of us on the mantel, the wedding in a blur of white, the kids' faces at the beach, and there were routines. Saturday coffee, Sunday groceries, the same joke about how she never learned to make tea right. But inside that hum of normalcy, small mechanical shifts happened. A phone tucked away screen down, a bedroom door closed for longer than seasons warrant. Betrayal, I learned, is less an eruption than a slow train derailment. You hear a different note in a familiar song and it goes on playing until the music is wrong. A week of watching taught me things that surveillance manuals talk about but tenderness ignores. You notice habitual things first, the way she hugged me, a turn more polite than hungry. You notice the casual evasions, it's nothing, I was at the office, you're overthinking, and you count the moments she spent looking at a screen with an intensity that felt like communion. She began to answer texts standing up, away from the coffee table where I could catch glimpses. If she saw me glance, she'd fold the phone into her palm like a secret that could heat up. I told myself the worst out loud only once. I sat at the kitchen table and said the sentence like a rope thrown into a well, "Are you seeing someone?" She looked at me like someone who has been asked an absurd riddle. "No," she said. The word was soft, the delivery automatic. She set down her mug slowly as if timing matters here. Her hands were steady. She smiled to soften the sharpness of my question, the smile of someone who still knows how to make peace bargains with the people they love. And yet she lied in a way that wasn't blustered. The truth was a slow leak that had already become an old stain on the carpet. My logic split. Was I a jealous fool inventing shadows, or a man whose world had thinned around the edges? Both seemed plausible. Both were true, in their private ways. I started small. I found myself waiting for her at the end of the day like a child in a schoolyard. I listened for keys. I learned how to listen for the particular shuffle of her phone being silenced. I learned to read the trajectory of a coat sleeve for hidden receipts. The detective in me loved the chase, following an instinct into the neat web of social media breadcrumbs, reading messages that opened like tiny windows, half glimpses, fragments, not enough to burn the house down but enough to set the furniture on edge. One night I opened her laptop, an act I had promised myself I would never commit in the name of a marriage's fragile trust. I told myself it was necessary, clinical, defensive. The touch of the trackpad felt illicit. There were emails, calendar invites, a name that kept appearing like a repeated chord, Maya. Maya this, Maya that. The calendar had meetings labeled creative. Messages were threaded with emojis that read like small, private jokes. There were photos of two women, arms folded around each other, the kind of photograph that doesn't belong framed on our mantle but belongs instead to the kind of life that happens elsewhere. When I confronted her, she laughed first, then hardened. "It's a colleague," she said. "Someone at the agency, creative liaison. Work. Work. Work is a refuge word. It is a field where bad things are allowed to be clean." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to fold my suspicion away and put it in the drawer marked fear. But the toothbrush kept appearing in the margins of thoughts like a red thread. I found a receipt tucked behind a lipstick tube. Wine bar, 3 in the morning. There was a bracelet in the laundry that smelled faintly of someone else. Claire's world became a house with rooms that had both open doors and locked ones. She shifted, sometimes, into a voice that belonged to a woman balancing two lives. With me, she was sometimes incandescent with memory. We'd talk about the old apartment and she'd laugh until her shoulders shook. With texts and late nights, she seemed to be living in a concurrency, parallel lines running close enough to see the other's shadow. At night I lay awake and rehearsed conversations. What I would say, what I would not say. I became an actor in a terrible play where everyone had read different scripts. My inner monologue split into two, the righteous accusatory voice that demanded admission and the desperate conciliatory voice that negotiated peace with any willing evidence. I hated both of them equally. I did something I swore not to. I trailed her. Following someone you love is a particular torture. It requires you to shrink to the size of a stain on the pavement. You learn to keep your head down, to time your steps, to blend with strangers. I sat on benches and watched her silhouette move with a familiarity that used to warm me. She met Maya, this is the name I'd been circling, at a cafe that tasted of espresso and smoke. I watched two women talk with the intimacy of people who share a private channel. Hand gestures, soft laughs, a touch on the shoulder that lasted long enough to be a punctuation. They left arm in arm. I didn't confront them. Confrontation felt like a switch that would make everything either explode or close forever. Instead, I kept collecting data. I photographed receipts, saved screenshots of little captions that read like private languages. I followed them to a loft in the Arts District one night and watched the interior lights cut the darkness into rectangles where figures moved like theater silhouettes. From the window I could see a phone-like glow on a couch, no shadows of men, only the curve of knees and the lean of female profiles. The evidence was there and yet it hovered like smoke, visible, unmappable, both a proof and a question. One evening Claire came home and found me at the kitchen table with a stack of printed receipts and an old Polaroid camera between my hands like an accusation. She took in the spread like a person taking stock of a battlefield. "You've been following me," she said simply. "Yes," I said. "Who is she, Claire?" "She Saturday." The apartment felt like a courtroom with me as both plaintiff and defense. "Her name is Maya," she said. Was, someone I worked with. It wasn't supposed to be like. It wasn't supposed to be like what? I asked. My voice sounded shocked to me, as if I were hearing a stranger. She looked at me with that raw, honest face that used to disarm me. It started as late nights. We collaborated. There was a night when the city was loud and she slept on my couch. She stopped, searching the space for words that could make it bearable. "I didn't mean to hurt you." The admission was a cliff, not the violent jolt I'd sometimes imagined but a softer, more dangerous erosion. "Was it physical?" I whispered. She hesitated as if the word were a stone too heavy to lift. "Yes," she said finally. "Once. Twice." It meant something to me in a way that, I don't know. It didn't stop right away. Hurt is a precise instrument. It parses the world into before and after. In the after, the photographs on the mantel were no longer documentary evidence. They were a map of a life I had misread. I felt ridiculous and furious all at once. There was grief too, dull and persistent like an old bruise. I had been loved and replaced in increments I had not seen. What I did next was impulsive, a thing born from humiliation and a quiet, private fury. I went to Maya's studio the next day. I wanted to shout, to plead, to make sense of the way Claire had spoken of meaning. Instead I found a space full of canvases and sketches, a life that smelled of solvent and coffee. Maya opened the door in an old sweater and had the flat, surprised look of someone who had not been prepared for accusation. She was younger than I expected, and very ordinary in the way people who are not performing for the world often are. Her eyes were tired in a way I recognized. "You're the husband," she said. It was not a question so much as a presumption. People meet their opposite ends like that. "Yes," I said. "Does she love you?" Maya's face folded into a patient sorrow I didn't respect. "We loved each other badly and sincerely," she said. "It's not as clean as betrayal sounds." She was searching. The term searching made me both angrier and softer. There is something infuriating about people seeking what they can't name. It's an insult to the one who sat waiting on the couch for years, and yet it opens a kind of terrible, human seam. I left Maya's studio with more questions and a strange relief. The story now had more characters and less mystery. It also had a trail, and trails can be followed. That night Claire and I did not speak about what had been said. She climbed into bed and fit herself into my side the way people do when they want forgiveness to be warm and immediate. I lay awake instead, listening for the night sounds and the small rasp of her breath. Part of me wanted to forgive because forgiveness felt like a fast fix, a way to buy time and move forward. Another part of me kept arranging the receipts like a mosaic, trying to make an image of what had been and what had been taken. In the smallest hours, when the city thinned and my head was a drumbeat of thought, I made a decision I would not later be able to take lightly. I started planning not for divorce, not for negotiation, but for something far colder. The idea took shape like a photograph burning slowly. If betrayal was a theft, maybe theft could be answered in kind. If love had been invested elsewhere, perhaps legal consequences could be arranged to match the magnitude of my humiliation. The plan was amorphous then, fueled by a cocktail of grief and a hunger for control. It felt awful and brilliant in equal measure. There is a dangerous clarity that comes when a life you trusted fractures. In that clarity, moral lines blur. You see options that the you before would have rejected. You begin to imagine the geometry of revenge, not petty revenge, not humiliation staged on the internet, but a judicial kind of retribution, evidence gathered, consequences measured, a ledger balanced where wrongs are recorded and paid back. I had no blueprint. I had only the flush of betrayal as currency. Part of me already felt the cold comfort of making someone else answer for the way my life had been altered. The other part knew, with a tender ache, that once you plan a vengeance you can't unsee its path, it becomes its own hunger. That hunger carried me into the dawn. The light was pale and untrusting as I made coffee and sat with the receipts and the Polaroids until the edges of my plan resolved. I knew now that this would not be a simple conversation. The toothbrush had been a small thing, but beneath it lay a river that would not reroute itself. The question that remained was whether I wanted to drown in that river or build a bridge over it, and if I built a bridge, what I would have to burn to lay its foundations. I put the Polaroid in my pocket and walked out the door. The city was beginning to stir. Somewhere between two tram stops I folded the light of revenge into a map and decided to go farther than the hurt. I didn't yet know what I would do, only that every inch of my future spun around the will to make the betrayal count for something bigger than a secret whispered in the dark. Outside, autumn had left a smell of crushed leaves and rain. The world looked indifferent to human miseries. Inside me, everything had rearranged itself around a new axis. The slow, hot geometry of making her answer. The courthouse lobby smelled like wet paper and disinfectant the first time I stepped inside. The overhead fluorescents buzzed like anxious insects. It wasn't the sort of place a husband goes to save a marriage. It was the sort of place he goes when something inside him has snapped neatly in two, leaving sharp edges that demand use. What no one tells you is this: revenge doesn't start as fire. It starts as numb practicality, a list, a folder, a phone call. I wasn't planning to ruin Claire. Not yet. I only needed to know what ruin looked like. The clerk handed me forms with board efficiency. "If you suspect financial misconduct," she said, tapping a section, "you'll want to document everything. Bank transfers, unusual spending, hidden assets." Hidden assets. My mouth went dry. I wasn't the one hiding anything. Or so I thought. That night, the apartment felt too small for the two of us. Claire tiptoed around me with exaggerated softness, as if afraid the floor might shout our history back at her. When she reached for my hand on the couch, her fingers trembled. That detail struck me harder than any confession. Guilt also shakes. "I want to fix this," she whispered. "Do you?" I asked. Her eyes flicked away, not in dishonesty, but in cowardice. She didn't want to face the ruins she had made. People rarely do. She held my wrist gently, thumb brushing the inside where the skin is thin. "I'll end it with her. I'll prove it." I stared at her. "How?" Her shoulders sagged. For a moment she looked like the girl I married at 22. Earnest, flawed, terrified of losing something she'd taken for granted. Then she stood and walked to her office. I heard drawers opening, papers shuffling. When she returned, she sat across from me and placed a small envelope on the coffee table. "This is everything," she said. "Messages. Photos. Proof. Whatever you want to see." The envelope was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I choose you," she whispered. The sentence struck a place in me that had been starved. But hunger is not trust. I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. The shift. Her sudden transparency, too sudden, itched at me. When betrayal has already sunk teeth into you, even honesty feels like manipulation. The next day I took the envelope to work. I didn't open it. I only stared at it until noon, when curiosity and pain finally outweighed restraint. Inside were printed messages, screenshots, a handful of receipts, and something else folded twice into a neat square, a contract. Not just any contract. A financial transfer agreement. Between Claire and Maya. For $87,000. My stomach dropped. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was funding her affair. There were clauses, art supply purchases, studio renovations, and equipment investment. Signed by both of them. Dated 6 months ago. And worse. One line flagged in bold. Mutual consent. Beneficiary understands the funds are personal and may be permanently unrecoverable. The money was gone. Our savings. Our future. Our children's tuition fund. She hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd betrayed our life. Something inside me turned cold, sharp, and strangely calm. Now I had motive. Now I had evidence. Now revenge wasn't petty, it was legal. The trap. That night I waited at the dining table with the documents spread out like a murder scene. Claire walked in, saw everything, and stopped breathing. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly. Her knees bent. She slid into the chair opposite me, face pale. "I was going to. I swear." Maya was struggling. Her studio was failing. She didn't ask, I offered. "You offered $87,000. Her breath hitched. "I know it's bad. I know. But I wasn't thinking rationally. I was lost." "Was it love?" I asked. She didn't answer. And that silence was worse than any confession. Something in her expression shifted then. A flicker. A calculation. As if she sensed something dangerous in my calm. "What are you going to do with these?" she whispered. I leaned forward. "I'm going to the police." Her face twisted. "For what? It's not a crime to give someone money." "Not if it was yours," I said. "But it wasn't. It was joint. You transferred marital assets without consent. In this state, that counts as financial abuse. Fraud. And depending on interpretation, embezzlement." Her mouth fell open. You wouldn't." "I would," I said. "Because you didn't just cheat. You stole." She burst into tears so violent the table trembled. "Please. I'll return it. I'll fix it." "You can't return money someone already spent." "What do you want?" she sobbed. I wanted 1,000 things. For the toothbrush to be clean. For the lies to happen. For the life we built to rewind to the morning before I found proof of the affair. But revenge is its own gravity. Once you fall completely. "I want you," I said, To confess. In writing. Her sobbing stopped abruptly. What? You'll write everything. The affair. The money. The transfers. The deception. A full signed statement. She stared at me with shaking horror. You're going to weaponize it? Yes, I said. I am. Because betrayal deserves a permanent record. After a long, terrible pause, she whispered, I'll do it. The police station. The officer read the statement twice. His expression tightened at the financial details. He tapped the page where the contract confirmed the transfer. You're filing charges? He asked me. Yes. Claire sat beside me, hands trembling in her lap, mascara streaking her cheeks. She looked like a woman realizing she had stepped into a legal abyss she never imagined. The officer nodded. We'll open an investigation. This may escalate to criminal court depending on what we uncover. Claire turned to me with a look I will never forget, a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. You're really doing this, she whispered. You already did, I said. She closed her eyes. When they took her statement separately, an officer asked her to wait in a side room. I watched her disappear behind the frosted glass door with a feeling I couldn't name. Grief, vindication, exhaustion. They released us pending formal charges. But the process had begun. I thought that was the worst moment of her life. I was wrong. The twist. 2 weeks later, Detective Ramos called me. Mr. Hale, he said. We've finished reviewing your evidence. And there's something you need to know. My grip tightened on the phone. What is it? We didn't just look into your wife. We examined all accounts involved. Including Maya's. A pause. The kind that rearranges a life. Sir. Maya was already under federal investigation. She's tied to a larger fraud ring, money laundering using forged art purchases. Your wife's funds weren't just misused. They were funneled into a criminal operation. My heart thudded. What does that mean? It means, he said, your wife unknowingly contributed to felony activity. And legally, that makes her an accessory. She could face serious prison time. My knees buckled. Can she clear her name? I asked. Possibly, if she cooperates as a witness. But we'll need full cooperation. And her confession helps us tremendously. The confession I made her write. The confession I forced. The confession that would now save her from a decade in prison. My revenge, meant to destroy her, had accidentally given the police exactly what they needed to protect her. The irony tasted metallic. What happens next? I asked quietly. We'll arrest Maya within the week, Ramos said. Your wife will be given protective status. She'll be safe. Safe. That word landed like a bruise. Claire wasn't the villain I had carved her into. She was a fool, a betrayer, a woman who let desire cloud judgment. But she had walked into danger she didn't understand. And I had used her confession as a weapon without realizing it was also a shield. The aftermath. When I told Claire, she didn't speak. She just sank onto the sofa, hands over her mouth. You saved me, she whispered after a long time. No, I said honestly. I didn't mean to. But you did. Her eyes met mine, full of a gratitude that tore at something deep in my chest. And now, she asked, what happens to us? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Love wasn't enough. Trust was shattered. Revenge had twisted everything into shapes we couldn't recognize. But one truth rose above all others. Betrayal destroys the past. Revenge destroys the future. And we were standing in the wreckage of both. Final twist, the prison sentence. 3 months later, Maya was sentenced to 8 years for fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Claire testified. Her confession cleared her from charges. Her cooperation kept her free. But what none of us knew, what shocked even the detectives, was that Maya had left a final letter for Claire, found in her studio during the raid. A letter addressed only to the woman I loved. Inside, one line was underlined. He will destroy you for loving me. I hope it's worth it. Claire showed me the letter silently. I read it twice. then looked at her. Her eyes shimmered, not with guilt, but with a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. Was it? I asked. She inhaled sharply. No. Nothing was worth what we did to each other. We stood there, two people whose love had been replaced by an ache shaped like justice and regret. We didn't reconcile. We didn't scream. We didn't beg. We simply understood. Some wounds are too deep to close. Some truths too heavy to share. And some betrayals end not in fury, but in the quiet realization that forgiveness is sometimes just another kind of lie.